Last autumn, I found myself in a quiet village in the French countryside, sitting across from a cattle farmer named Jean-Pierre. When the topic of the new EU-Mercosur trade deal came up, the atmosphere in the room changed instantly. Jean-Pierre didn't reach for a calculator or talk about market access. Instead, he pulled out a worn photo of his grandfather standing in the same fields they were working today. His voice was thick with a kind of quiet, vibrating resentment. To the people in Brussels, he said, pointing at the television, I'm just a rounding error, a cost to be optimized. He spoke about how the macroeconomic gains everyone kept celebrating felt like a slow-motion eviction notice for his community. To the urban consumer, the deal meant cheaper steak. To him, it meant the end of a 5-generation legacy. What was fascinating was how he didn't care about the GDP growth charts or the win-win rhetoric. He saw the world in winners and losers, and he knew exactly which side he was on. I asked him what he thought about the cheaper electronics and cars that the deal would bring. His face hardened. He didn't see the benefit of a cheaper smartphone if the cost was the soul of his town. He called it hush money for the dying. That total rejection of the all ships rise logic, the sheer intensity of his refusal to be a footnote in a spreadsheet, left me deeply unsettled. It made me realize that while free trade might win every argument on paper, it is losing the war in the streets. We have been told for decades that the adjustment is just temporary, a small price to pay for progress. But looking at Jean-Pierre, I saw that these adjustments have names, faces, and most importantly, votes. How did the theory that promises to make everyone richer end up fueling the greatest political fires of our century? Why does the math of globalization keep failing the reality of the people?
Hush money for the dying. I mean, wow.
Yeah.
That is a devastating phrase.
It is, isn't it? You stopped me in my tracks.
It completely cuts through all of the, the academic noise we usually hear, all the jargon around trade deals. What Jean-Pierre is describing there with that visceral clarity is what we in the field call distributive failure.
Distributive failure.
Yeah, but honestly, even that term, it feels so sterile. It's so technical for what is actually happening to people's lives.
It sounds like a plumbing problem, We've got a bit of a distributive failure in Sector 4. But Jean-Pierre wasn't talking about plumbing. He was talking about erasure. His entire world being erased.
Exactly. And that gap, that huge chasm between the language of economics and the language of, survival. That's where we've been living for the last 40 years. See, the dominant narrative, the one that really built the modern global economy, it relies on these classical models.
Like Heckscher-Ohlin.
The Heckscher-Ohlin model. It's a standard theory. It's what everyone learns. And it suggests that if you lower trade barriers, every country specializes in what they're best at producing.
The theory of comparative advantage.
Right. So the global pie gets bigger, we all get more stuff, we get cheaper stuff, and technically, on paper, the world is wealthier.
And if you look at the aggregate numbers, that's true. I mean, we have 4K TVs that cost $300. We have avocados in the middle of winter.
We absolutely do. The model delivered on that promise. But, and this is the part that was often, let's say, whispered in the footnotes rather than shouted from the rooftops, the model also predicts something else.
Okay.
It predicts that while the country as a whole gains wealth, the specific groups who own the scarce factors of production, they will lose.
The scarce factors. Yeah. So in a high-wage country, that means people, labor.
In a rich country like France or the United States, labor is expensive, land is expensive. So if you open the floodgates to competition from places where land and labor are, incredibly cheap, the value of Jean-Pierre's labor or his land, it doesn't just stagnate.
He becomes an inefficiency.
He becomes an inefficiency to be solved, a cost to be optimized, in his own words.
That's the cost to be optimized, he mentioned. It's like he understands the model better than the policymakers who are pushing it.
Oh, he feels the model. He lived the model. You see, the theory always had this little caveat, this asterisk. It said, well, the winners can compensate the losers.
Right. We'll tax the winners and help the losers adjust.
We were supposed to tax the tech giants, the financial firms, all the people who got fabulously wealthy from globalization. And we were supposed to use that money to make sure Jean-Pierre and his community could transition into something new. Retraining, new infrastructure, social safety nets.
But we didn't do that.
We didn't do that. Really. Not on the scale required. We kept the efficiency, we took the cheap goods, and we fundamentally broke the social contract.
And this feels like the central tension of our entire era. We optimize the system for one variable price.
But we completely forgot to optimize for things like dignity or community or stability. And now the bill for that oversight is coming due. Or this massive shift from the old deal of hyper-globalization to, well, to whatever is coming next.
Yeah.
We're seeing a move toward what's being called productivism, maybe even looking at an East Asian style of state capacity, and even feminist economics.
We are definitely moving from an era of efficiency at all costs to an era of resilience and security. You'll hear it called a new mercantilism, or more accurately, I think, defensive mercantilism. Defensive, because it's a reaction. It's a fundamental rewriting of the rules, and it's driven by the simple realization that you cannot build a stable, functioning democracy on a foundation of hush money.
To really understand why this is happening now, and with such force, we have to look at the American parallel to Jean-Pierre, because this isn't just a French story.
Okay.
I heard his story recently, and it just struck me as the perfect counterweight to the French countryside. Elias lives in a town in the American Midwest, you know the kind of place. A town that used to breathe through the smokestacks of a local steel mill.
Land. The Rust Belt.
Exactly. But for Elias, that heartbeat stopped years ago. When the mill closed, and this was largely due to what economists call the China shock and these shifting tides of free trade, the town didn't just lose a few hundred jobs. It lost its entire organizing principle, its reason for being.
Its identity.
Its identity. I saw this documentary clip where Elias described how the macroeconomic gains that were promised by economists, he said they felt like a ghost story. Everyone on the news kept talking about them, but nobody he knew, nobody in his zip code, ever actually saw them.
It's a phantom wealth. It exists in the stock market tickers, in the GDP reports, in the cloud, but it never lands on the ground.
Never. And you have to try to imagine the bitterness of that. You're told the country's richer than it's ever been in human history, but your own kids have to move 3 states away just to find a service job that pays half of what you used to make stamping steel.
The promise feels like a lie.
It feels like a deliberate lie. This is the distributive failure in flesh and blood. And when I look at this as a commentator, I feel a profound sense of, well, empathy for the anger that fuels these populist movements.
Of course.
It isn't just about a paycheck. It's about the loss of dignity when a society's industrial core is hollowed out and replaced with
Amazon warehouses.
While some might see this anger as purely obstructive or irrational, I see it as a desperate cry for a system that values physical output, that values local stability over just abstract percentages on a spreadsheet.
And that distinction you just made, valuing physical output, that is so crucial. For a long time, the consensus was that it didn't matter what we made as long as we made money.
Computer chips or potato chips.
Right, that was the saying. But Elias knows, and now the rest of us are realizing, that making steel is different from flipping burgers. It creates a different kind of job, a different kind of tax base, a different kind of community, a different kind of society.
It's a foundational industry. And we have to understand that when the compensation for the losers never, ever arrives, the losers eventually stop believing in the game altogether. Elias isn't just sad or disappointed. He's done with the system.
And the data backs him up completely. This isn't just anecdotal. We really need to talk about the China shock, the academic work behind it.
Okay.
For years, the consensus in Washington, in London, in Brussels, was that labor markets are flexible. They're like water, they'll find their level. If a factory closes in Ohio, the theory said Elias would just, pack up and move to Texas where there are new jobs. He'd retrain.
Learn to code. That was the phrase for a while.
Learn to code. Right, it was almost a punchline. But the groundbreaking work of economists like David Otter at MIT, he and his colleagues proved that was a fantasy.
It's not how real life works.
In the real world, people have roots. They have families. They have elderly parents to care for. They have a house they can't sell because the main employer just left and the town is dying. The adjustment wasn't a little bit of smooth friction. It was a permanent gaping wound.
A scar.
A scar. And what they found in the data was horrifying. In the specific regions hit hardest by import competition from China, they saw long-term unemployment, lower wages for decades, collapse of local tax bases, which meant worse schools, worse roads.
The whole social fabric just unravels.
It unravels completely. And eventually you see the rise of what Ann Case and Angus Deaton called deaths of despair. Opioid addiction, suicide, alcoholism. This wasn't just an economic event. It was a social and public health catastrophe.
It's a slow-motion catastrophe, and it's invisible if you're only looking at the national GDP number.
And to visualize this on a global scale, we have to look at the elephant curve. It's a famous graph by the economist Branko Milanovic, and it basically explains the last 30 years of global economics in one single line.
Yes.
Imagine an elephant in profile, the rising back of the elephant, this big, broad hump that represents the emerging middle class in Asia. Hundreds of millions of people in China, in India, in Vietnam who were lifted out of poverty. That is the great triumph of globalization, and we can't forget that.
Okay, so that's the good part of the story. A huge win for humanity.
A massive win. Now look at the elephant's trunk at the very end of the graph. It shoots straight up into the air. That's the global 1%. The elite in every country who capitalized on global markets, on finance, on technology, they won huge.
So the back is the Asian middle class. The trunk is the global elite. What's in between?
In between, there's a trough. A dip. The curve goes down right at the base of the trunk. And that dip, that represents the working and middle classes in the developed Western nations.
People like Elias, people like Jean-Pierre.
Exactly them. Their incomes completely stagnated or even fell in real terms, while the rest of the world zoomed right past them. They were the ones who paid the price for the cheap goods and the soaring stock market.
That dip, that's where the political fire is burning. That's where Brexit comes from. That's where Trump comes from.
That is the epicenter. Because the compensation mechanisms failed so catastrophically, voters like Elias turned to populism. They stopped trusting the experts who told them free trade is good for you, because their lived reality every single day told them that free trade destroyed their town.
And this leads us directly to this idea of defensive mercantilism.
Directly. Western governments are finally waking up to the fact that cheaper consumer goods, that smartphone that Jean-Pierre mentioned, are not a valid or sustainable trade-off for the complete destruction of your social fabric.
It's a realization that you can't eat a cheap TV. You can't raise a family on a low-priced t-shirt.
And you cannot build a cohesive democratic community on Amazon deliveries alone. So now you see the US and the EU turning to tools they had abandoned for decades. Tariffs, industrial policy, subsidies.
We're trying to reshore industries.
Exactly. They're trying to bring manufacturing back, not because it's always more efficient in the short term, it's often more expensive, but because it provides security. It provides resilience. They are trying to protect the social contract that the old deal shredded into a million pieces.
So we have the West in a state of, well, almost panic, trying to frantically rebuild what it lost. But there's another narrative out there, a powerful counter-narrative. We often frame this whole debate as democracy versus autocracy, but economically, I think it's more about laissez-faire versus state capacity.
I think that's a much more useful frame.
To understand that, I want to take you to Southeast Asia now. I was scrolling through a series of vlogs from an infrastructure hub in that region, and I came across the story of a woman named Len. Her story is almost the perfect inverse of Jean-Pierre's. Her family had farmed a small plot of land for generations, much like his. But the government slated her entire area for a massive new industrial park and a high-speed rail link.
In France or the US, that would be the start of a 10-year, maybe 20-year court battle.
A generational court battle.
Yeah.
In a Western context, we would see this immediately through the lens of individual property rights. We would fight it, we would protest, and frankly, we would probably stop it. NIMBism.
Not in my backyard.
Right. But Lynn spoke about it completely differently. She called it a collective survival strategy.
Wow. A collective survival strategy.
She didn't see herself as a victim of the state, but as a participant in a grander national design. A design to ensure her community, her country, wouldn't be left behind in the global race.
It's almost alien to a Western individualist mindset.
Try to imagine a culture where the balance between individual rights and social responsibility isn't seen as a constant tug of war, but more like a shared harness, pulling everyone forward together. I watched this video of her moving into a modern apartment, a new high-rise, that was provided by the project. Her kids were now training for technical roles in the new factories that were being built. Now, I know my Western viewers might find the lack of individual veto power jarring, and I get that perspective. Protecting the one against the many is a pillar of our entire philosophy.
Absolutely.
However, I can't help but notice the resilient framework this creates. By prioritizing the collective uplift, they seem to avoid the decay and deindustrialization that turns so many Western suburbs into rust. It challenges our definitions of freedom. But when you look at Lynn's thriving new neighborhood, it's very hard to argue with the tangible security it provides for her family.
Lynn's story is the perfect illustration of what people call the East Asian model. It's built on a foundation of state capacity.
State capacity, the ability to actually get things done.
The ability to get big, hard things done. In the West, especially under the influence of neoliberalism, we spent decades trying to shrink the state. We were told the state was the problem. Government is the problem.
They didn't buy that bumper sticker in Singapore.
No, they couldn't afford to. They were, and still are, fighting against a very specific threat that Danny Roderick calls premature deindustrialization.
Premature deindustrialization.
Okay, so historically, countries like the UK or the US got rich by building factories. We industrialized, we built a massive manufacturing base, created a stable middle class, and then, once we were already rich, we transitioned to becoming service-based economies. But today, for developing nations, it's different. They're losing their factories to global competition, especially from China, before they get rich. They're becoming service economies while they are still poor.
A developmental dead end.
It's a complete development disaster. Because the kind of service jobs you get in poorer countries, selling food on the street, informal domestic work, that sort of thing, they don't drive productivity growth the way manufacturing does. You can't export haircuts. So Lin's government is intervening forcefully. They are using industrial policy to push their way up the value chain. They are building the rails and the ports and the industrial parks to ensure they don't get stuck in that trap.
And to do that, they rely on a class of technocrats.
Right. They often insulate their economic planners from the daily populist pressures of the news cycle. In the West, a politician is always thinking about the next election, which is maybe 2 years, 4 years away.
A very short time horizon.
Incredibly short. In these systems, the technocrats are thinking about the national industrial base in 20 years, 30 years. It allows for a kind of long-term strategic planning that the West has largely lost the ability to do. It's less democratic in our procedural sense, no doubt, but it often delivers the goods.
It delivers results. And that capability, that ability to deliver, brings us right back to the crisis of governance we're facing back home. It's not just that we made a series of bad economic choices. It feels like we've lost the ability to make any big choices at all. I recently read this account from an urban planner named Marcus. And his story was just, it was so telling. He worked on public projects in London for years, and then he took a job in an emerging eastern metropolis. The contrast he described was just staggering.
Imagine.
He said the political volatility of the West felt like a constant fog he was trying to walk through. Every single project he started in London was derailed by something. A change in the local government, a populist protest about a trivial issue, a lawsuit from an interest group. He called it the uncompensated frustrations of the public blocking any and all progress.
It's what Francis Fukuyama has termed the vitocracy, a system where too many players have the power to say no, and almost no one has the power to say yes.
A vitocracy. So Marcus then moves to this other system, a system he characterized as result-oriented governance. He described a city where once a need was identified, be it a new power grid, a port, a subway line, the institutional efficiency was just mind-blowing. The project didn't get bogged down in the endless performative politics that we see in the West, which often just mask the failures of globalization.
The process becomes the point, not the outcome.
Exactly. I saw a photo of a bridge he helped build. It was completed in 18 months. He said a similar, actually smaller project back home had been in consultation for 8 years.
8 years of talking versus 18 months of action.
Yeah, and you have to think about the psychological impact of that. The impact on a citizen who sees their environment physically improving in real time versus one who sees only stagnation, decay, and bickering. As someone who analyzes these trends, I can see the powerful appeal of this Eastern efficiency. And while we must be incredibly careful not to sacrifice the checks and balances that prevent the abuse of power, we also have to acknowledge that the West is currently suffering from a vitocracy that breeds populism. When the system stops delivering results for ordinary people, they start looking for a leader who will promise to just smash the system.
And that's a dangerous road.
The Eastern model, for all its complexities and its flaws, it focuses on the result as the ultimate stabilizer. And I think there is a profound lesson there about why their societies currently feel, in many ways, so much more cohesive and optimistic than our own.
That concept of result-oriented legitimacy is so critical to understanding this. In the West, for centuries, we've believed that political legitimacy comes from the process. Did we have a free and fair election?
Procedure thing.
But if the election is free and the government you elect still can't pick up the trash or pave the road or build a bridge, people start to lose faith in the process itself. In the East Asian model, legitimacy comes much more from the outcome. Is my life getting better? Is the country moving forward? Is it safer? If the answer is yes, then the government is seen as legitimate.
It's deeply pragmatic.
And Marcus's frustration in London highlights our growing crisis of capability. It's not a crisis of ideology necessarily, but of execution. If democracies cannot build things, if they can't protect their key industries, if they can't deliver tangible security to their people, they lose the faith of citizens like Jean-Pierre and Elias. They create the vacuum that populism is now rushing to fill.
Okay, Doc, we've diagnosed the problem pretty thoroughly. We have this deep distributive failure in the West. We have a crisis of state capability, this vitocracy. On the other hand, we see the East Asian model sprinting ahead with its own model of state capacity. But we can't just copy-paste Vietnam's political system onto France or the US. It just wouldn't work. And we deeply value our civil liberties, our individual rights. So what is the alternative for the West? If the old neoliberal deal is broken and the Eastern model is culturally or politically incompatible, what do we do? Where do we go from here?
And this is where a new framework called productivism comes in. It's an emerging idea championed by economists like Donny Roderick that tries to find a third way, a middle path.
Productivism. It sounds, well, industrious.
The last 70 years of Western economic thought have been a battle between two big ideas. First, you had neoliberalism, which said, trust the market knows better.
Right, laissez-faire.
Then you had the response, which was Keynesianism, or social democracy. And that model said, the market is great at creating wealth, but it's terrible at distributing it. It creates huge inequality. So let the market do its thing, and then we'll tax the rich and write checks to the poor.
Redistribution after the fact.
Exactly. It's a Band-Aid. A necessary one sometimes, but still a Band-Aid on a wound. Productivism comes along and says, why don't we stop just applying Band-Aids? Why don't we fix the factory floor so people don't get cut in the first place?
Okay.
So it focuses on the supply side of the economy. It argues that the government has a crucial role to play in actively coordinating with the private sector to create good jobs in the first place, high wage, high skill, stable jobs.
So it's pre-distribution rather than redistribution.
It means industrial policy is no longer a dirty word. It's no longer seen as picking winners. It's about the government saying, as a society, we need a green energy transition, or we need resilient domestic supply chains for medicine, and then using public investment and coordination to build those sectors and revitalize communities like Elias's town.
So you're not just giving a handout, you're building a new industrial ecosystem.
You are disseminating productive economic opportunities throughout the entire workforce and across the entire country, not just concentrating them in a few elite sectors like finance and tech in a few coastal cities.
It's treating a job not just as a paycheck, which is how the old model saw it, but as a source of dignity, of social inclusion.
If you just give Elias a welfare check, he survives, but he remains excluded from the productive life of the nation. He's a dependent. If you help build a new green steel plant in his town, he gets his dignity back. He becomes a participant again, a contributor. That is the core idea of productivism.
But there's a missing piece here, isn't there? We've talked about steel, bridges, high-speed rail, green energy plants. These are all very hard assets. They're very, well, traditionally masculine symbols of economic power. But there's a whole other side to the economy. A massive part of it that the old deal completely ignored, and even this new productivism risks overlooking if we aren't careful.
You're talking about the care economy. Right. This is where feminist economics offers a critical, and I would argue, essential corrective to the entire discussion.
It's the invisible infrastructure of our society.
It's the infrastructure that makes all the other infrastructure possible. Standard economics, the kind we've been talking about, measures what we buy and sell. Cars, consulting hours, wheat. But it is completely blind to what's called social reproduction.
Social reproduction.
That's the work of raising children, caring for the elderly, maintaining the household, building the community, organizing the school bake sale. Historically, this work is overwhelmingly done by women.
And neoliberalism basically treated this work as an infinite free resource.
It just assumed it would always be there. It assumed that while men went to the factory or the office, women would just handle everything else for free. It built its entire model on top of this massive unacknowledged subsidy of unpaid female labor.
But that resource isn't infinite. Down.
It is completely breaking down. We are seeing a global crisis of care. You hear the term time poverty, especially for women. They're working full-time jobs in the formal economy and then coming home to a second shift of care work. It's unsustainable. A true, viable, alternative economic model must value this labor. It has to see it, measure it, and support it.
The example of the Bogota care system was a great illustration of this in action. It's such a radical idea.
It's one of the most innovative social policies in the world right now. The city government in Bogota realized that women were disproportionately trapped in poverty because of their immense care duties.
Right. They couldn't get an education, couldn't hold a full-time job.
So they built what they call care blocks all over the city. These are physical hubs, community centers where you can get laundry done, you can get subsidized childcare, elder care, all provided efficiently by the city. And while your care duties are being handled, you, the caregiver, can take classes, finish your degree, get job training, or just rest for an hour.
It's infrastructure for people, not just for cars or cargo.
Exactly. It recognizes care as work, and it builds public infrastructure to support it. And you have to connect this back to Jean-Pierre.
So
He wasn't just worried about his income, he was worried about the soul of his town. He was worried about his grandfather's legacy. What is that, if not a form of care work? He is trying to maintain the social fabric of his community. When a town like Elias's dies, it's not just an economic failure, it's a failure of care. Feminist economics teaches us that an economy that destroys its own communities just to save a nickel on a widget is fundamentally cannibalizing itself. It's eating its own foundation.
It's all connected. Jean-Pierre's legacy, Elias's dignity, Lynn's collective survival, the second shift of working mothers. We're seeing this massive convergence here from all these different angles.
We are moving from a world obsessed with efficiency to a world that is desperately seeking resilience.
That seems to be the headline for the 21st century so far.
So, look at the new mercantilism. The US and the EU are passing these huge pieces of legislation. The Chipatillas Act to bring semiconductor manufacturing back, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is actually a massive green energy industrial policy, the EU's Green Deal.
They're using scarce again. They're talking about friendshoring.
Exactly. Friendshoring, moving your critical supply chains out of potential adversaries and into trusted allies. They are doing all of this not just for geopolitical reasons, but to heal the deep fractures in their own societies.
It's a tacit admission that the fully globalized market is dangerous. It's too volatile.
Relying on a fragile, just-in-time global supply chain for your life-saving medicine, or for the chips that run your entire country, or for your energy. We've learned the hard way that this is a risk we can no longer afford to take, so we are consciously trading some efficiency for more security.
And we have to be honest about what that means. It might mean higher prices for some things. Jean-Pierre's next smartphone might cost a bit more.
It probably will, but maybe that's the price of living in a stable, cohesive society.
We're finally realizing that the impossibly low prices of the last 30 years had enormous hidden costs. They were subsidized by political polarization, by hollowed-out towns, by fragile supply chains, and by the unpaid labor of women. Now the bill is finally visible on the table for everyone to see. And what's fascinating is that it feels like the political left and the right are actually agreeing on this basic diagnosis, even if they would never admit it to each other.
They are converging. The populist right wants to protect the nation, the border, and the traditional family from the chaos of the global market. The progressive left wants to protect the worker, the environment, and vulnerable communities from the exploitation of that same market.
They disagree on the methods, but they agree on the premise.
They agree on the fundamental premise. The market cannot be the master of society. It must be the servant of society.
We are waking up from a long, and in some ways a very comfortable dream where we thought we could just outsource everything. Our factories, our problems, our responsibilities.
And the future is about rebuilding capacity. The capacity to make things, the capacity to care for people, the capacity to act collectively, whether it's through state-led infrastructure like we see in Asia, or a new industrial policy like productivism, or robust care systems like in Bogota. It's about the state stepping back in to secure the social contract that was broken.
So we've traveled from the fields of France to the American Rust Belt, through the gleaming new cities of Vietnam and the gridlock planning offices of London. It's been a journey through the wreckage of the old world and maybe the blueprints of a new one.
It's a very messy transition. It's going to be turbulent, but it feels necessary. We are trying, haltingly, to build an economy that serves society rather than forcing society to serve the economy.
Jean-Pierre said he refused to be a footnote in a spreadsheet. And I think that one sentiment, that powerful human refusal, is what's driving so much of the change in the world right now. People have roots, they have legacies, they have communities, and they have votes.
And ignoring them, treating them as rounding errors, is simply no longer an option. This new mercantilism, productivism, the focus on care. These are all attempts to finally water those roots again.
The realization that the cost of a cheap smartphone was never just the price tag. It was the stability of our neighbors and the resilience of our towns. But it's also a hopeful one, I think, because once you finally see the real cost of something, you can start making different choices. Now that the bill has come due, the question is no longer about how to optimize the next transaction, but how to rebuild the trust that was sold off in the process.
That rebuilding is the great work of our generation.
It certainly is.